Hello and welcome to today's webinar, What are the benefits of AWP? Presented by Josh Girvin, O3 Solutions CEO. So before we begin, here's a quick agenda for today. I'll go through a quick safety moment and then I'll introduce Josh and then he will discuss a little bit about O3, what AWP is, and then the benefits of AWP, including repeatability, predictability, measurability, and then we'll hit the key takeaways. And if we have time at the end, we'll answer some questions. And as a reminder, if you have questions, please submit them throughout the GoToWebinar panel. So first up, let's do a safety moment. This is on the importance of preventative care. As we start a new year, it's always important to understand that going to the doctor is essential in your health. And during the last couple of years, during COVID, preventative care has actually gone down. So it's important to keep going to your routine appointments. Depending on your age, you may have access to such services like blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol tests, cancer screenings, and much more. And then always, if you have children too, make sure you're attending your well baby and well child visits up until they're the age of 21. And then lastly, just always make sure you're getting your routine vaccinations against all of the commonalities like measles, polio, or meningitis. And always stay up to date on your COVID vaccine too. So with that, I'll introduce Josh. He is the O3 Solutions CEO, a CII AWP community for business advancement. He's on the leadership team. He's a performance and benchmarking founding co-chair, a scaffolding working group founding co-chair, AWP for engineering founding and current chair, and CII technology committee member, a former SVP product and market strategy for materials management and RFID software. He has 12 technology patents and a BSc mechanical engineering from Princeton. So welcome, Josh. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tori. So I'd like to start off by just giving, for those of you who are not familiar with O3, just a little bit of information on who we are. O3 is the market-leading agile software built specifically for advanced work packaging. So we're not slapping an AWP sticker on some other generic tool, built specifically around advanced work packaging. And it's the only solution at market with true work package management, actually managing those packages through an entire life cycle, not just scoping packages. And it applies across all sizes of projects, across all industries. If you're doing AWP, O3 can help you no matter where you are on your AWP maturity journey. Some example experience that O3 has working with both small cap projects and large cap projects. We have some projects with thousands of users with collaboration across hundreds of different entities. We have some projects where we're managing hundreds of small cap projects across a portfolio of projects. We have projects where we're connecting in and automating the data exchange between hundreds of different data sources. So regardless of the size of the project or the complexity or it's onshore or offshore or the industry, if you're using AWP, O3 is the software solution for you. And then in terms of the solution that we offer, this is a look at the overall product offering. It is a complete platform product that goes across the entire life cycle of the project, starting with on plan for the front end planning side, on design for detailed design, on build for construction. That's where you typically see the work phase planning and scaffold work phase planning and other components that you're probably used to. And then on start for AWP in startup and commissioning. And then on target is our agile project management and collaboration platform that underpins that. So one of the things to keep in mind, while O3 is a project life cycle wide solution that goes across the entire life cycle, it wasn't developed by buying a bunch of different softwares and then duct taping them together the way that some platforms have come about. O3 had the advantage of understanding what right looked like from the beginning and then architecting a solution to provide value across the entire project phase using a consistent database and a consistent user interface and a consistent user experience. So it's not a bunch of different softwares that have been tied together to provide a platform across the entire life cycle. It is a complete, built from the bottom up, designed, intentionally purpose built to be the first and only true AWP solution across the entire project life cycle. So what is AWP? You keep talking about AWP. What is that? Well, AWP is a project execution methodology. It is a best practice from the Construction Industry Institute, or CII. And the main thing that I want people to understand about this is that it is a disciplined approach to project planning and execution. So it is a planning process, and it goes across the entire project life cycle, from the very front end planning all the way through startup and commissioning. It is not a construction execution methodology. True AWP involves engineering, it involves design, it involves startup and commissioning, it involves testing, it involves all aspects of the project, not just the construction and the IWPs that folks are used to. So I can talk about AWP for a long time, but if you wanted more information on that, we have much more detail. But just remember, it is a project execution methodology, and it's a disciplined approach to project planning. So why would you do this AWP? What's the point? What are the benefits that you get as a result of using AWP? Well, the one that people talk about a lot is this increase in tool time. So CII did some studies and found that you, on average, it varies on where you are in the world, but in North America, you see about a 37% tool time on a standard project. So on a 10-hour day, 3.7 hours are spent hoods down, welding, time on tools. When you use AWP, you can increase that productivity or time on tools by 25%. And that is something that CII has shown, and then others have evaluated that as well. So this is a core value that people use to sell the concept of AWP, but I'm going to talk more about the components of AWP, or the value as we see them. So while this is an outcome of increased productivity, we really think about the benefits of AWP and put them into a couple of different buckets. The increase in productivity of the 25% increase, that, if you assume 40% labor costs, that leads to about a 10% decrease in the total installed cost, which also has the benefit of an increase in safety. The increase in safety comes because you have better planned work. People know exactly what they're going to be doing that day. They're not scrambling. They're not trying to figure out things on the fly. You have a very planned and disciplined approach to execution. And when you have that, then the safety incidents are reduced significantly. The majority of safety incidents happen when you have an unknown or a shift or a change. When things are well planned out and well thought through, you have a significant decrease in safety issues. So when we talk about the increase in productivity, one debate that's happening now within the leadership of CII is whether we need to kill this idea that the 25%, because it can be misleading, particularly if it's your first time doing AWP, to expect to get a 25% increase in productivity the first time you use a new process or tool is not, it's not realistic or likely. That being said, we have seen and documented with clients an 18% improvement in AWP projects tool time over non-AWP project tool time. And this is using tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of observations across many different projects. So this is not, and this is data that was collected and organized by the client, not by O3. So it's not a self-serving O3 maneuver. This is about AWP itself. We have shown an 18% increase in tool time when using AWP principles for planning. So that's not the 25% that we see mentioned often, but it is the 18%, which is a significant increase. And we likely have seen 25% on other projects as well, but this is the most comprehensive study done to date on AWP versus non-AWP project productivity. So the AWP benefit of increased productivity, increased time on tools, decreased TIC that results from that, that's a great benefit that grabs people's attention. They say, wow, 10% decrease in TIC on $1 billion project, that's $100 million. Why wouldn't I do this? And that's all great. And you do see those benefits. But one of the challenges that we find is that when you lead with that, that can be misleading, because people either don't achieve those levels of AWP productivity increase when they're early in their journey. So they're immature from an AWP perspective. So when your first projects, you typically don't see that level of productivity gain. And then the other issue is, what are you measuring that productivity gain against? If you're looking at things of past projects, or you're looking at estimated versus actuals. The challenge there is that in a lot of cases, some of that value has already been baked into the estimates and the way that the project was proposed. So you can sometimes not capture all that or not see some of that value. If you do the hands-on tool time or time on tools studies independently and look at AWP projects and compare them to non-AWP projects, you can eliminate some of that challenge. But there is still a big debate within CII whether or not we need to kill that 25% number because it can be misleading, particularly for people who are early in their journey. So at O3, how do we think about the benefits if that's not how we think about it? Well, we put them in 3 core categories. One is repeatability, the second is predictability, and the third is measurability. If you think about AWP as a process, it brings these 3 things to your project that otherwise you are unlikely to accomplish. You may think you're accomplishing these, or you may believe you can accomplish these, but what we find, the industry data shows us that on an industry scale, we simply are not accomplishing these. With 80% of our projects being over budget and over schedule, to suggest that we're doing this as best as we can simply is not accurate. So putting aside our own beliefs about what we think we're doing on our projects and opening our minds up to, are we actually being absolutely the best we possibly can be? And the answer to that is no. We can get increased repeatability, predictability, and measurability by using AWP as a process, and I'll go through each of these in more detail. So what are the benefits of AWP repeatability? Why do I care about repeatability? Well, if you look at the current state, the challenges today, we consider projects to be snowflakes. Every project is unique. It has all these specifics. It has its own contracting strategy. It has its own scope. It has its own contractor, its own tech stack. It's got all these things that are specific to only this project that make it unique, which means that we have to reinvent the process each time we do a project. Every time we start a project, we reinvent the wheel and come up with a new process, a new tech stack, and it's based on what we've done in the past. It's not a completely redoing it, but the reality is that the projects are not cookie cutter repeatable projects. They just aren't. The scopes are changing, the specifics are changing. It's not an assembly line where a company like Toyota is able to tell you how many extra cents a Camry would cost if you move the screwdriver from the left hip to the right hip of the person working on the assembly line, right? Toyota is able to have that level of visibility into it because it's an incredibly repeatable process. I'm building exactly the same car and I'm building millions of them. Well, we don't have that in the construction industry, particularly in industrial construction. We have these projects that are unique and have differences between them. So how does AWP help us with this challenge? Well, the reality is that AWP adds definition to the process that allows you to be repeatable. By following the best practices of AWP, you can abstract yourself away from the project specifics and focus on the process. You can ensure that you have a repeatable process in terms of planning and execution. Now, what you're planning to build and what you're actually building may change from project to project, as it will, and who's building it and all those project specifics. But if you have a disciplined approach to how you plan the work and how you execute that work, if that process is the same and repeatable, there's huge benefits to that. And AWP allows you to do that. It is a disciplined approach. It puts up those guardrails and helps you to ensure that you're following a consistent process. So if that's what AWP does, then how does O3 help you with that? Well, there's a couple of things. One is you can configure the solution to enforce those workflows, right? So the best practices of AWP are built into the tool, and you get those rules and reminders. So if you try and step out of a process, you can be prevented from doing that, or you can be forced to acknowledge that choose and acknowledge that you're stepping out of that process and why you're doing that. And then not only is it enforcing this workflow or process and best practice, but you also have this project-wide collaboration inside of a single tool. One of the reasons why our projects are not repeatable from project A to project B is because so much happens outside of the core tool, right? So much decision-making is happening in Excel, and action tracking is happening in Excel, and communications happening in emails and text messages. You have all these other systems that are outside of the tool. So even if you use that same tool on the next project, how you fill all these other things out and around it and do all those other pieces that changes how we execute the project. But when you're using O3, That's built in. The project-wide collaboration, all the project stakeholders in a single tool, all actions and decisions and risks and everything that needs to be done to execute the project all in one place with visibility across that and ability to then put that and enforce that action tracking and management process and reporting process into a repeatable process that you use on every project. So a lot of benefit in being able to control the workflows and get everybody into the same tool and executing and planning the work in the same way. So what does this mean to the project? Well, it's a big benefit in productivity. So time on tools increase is driven by the repeatability of the project. But the most important thing about repeatability is that it allows you to do iterative improvement. And it allows you to do that from project to project. So if I execute the projects the same way, I can get better and better at my project execution over time. And we have seen this with clients. We've seen that increase in productivity from one project to the next as they get better and better with this process. But it also allows iterative improvement from package to package. So as I'm building packages, I can get smarter throughout the course of a project. I don't have to wait, do lessons learned at the end, and then hope that I look at those next time and hope that the next project's better. Because I have this well-defined process, I've got everyone in the tool, and I have a digital tracking of whether people are following that process. I can identify where I have issues or aberrations or from that process, outliers, right? And then I can work to improve those. I can work with those planners that maybe are having issues. Some of that is automated through the tool, and some of that can be human intervention. But the tool allows you to identify where you have process issues and where you need to step in and course correct. So that repeatability is incredibly valued because when you repeat something, you can get better at it. If you do something just once, it's hard to get better at that. If you never do it a second time, you're unlikely to be better at it the second time. So when you're doing things differently each time, you can't get better. When you're repeatable, when you have a consistent process, you can iteratively improve. Well, what about predictability? Why does this matter? Well, when we look at the current state today, predictability is a real challenge. Why is that a challenge? Well, projects are planned using waterfall planning methodology, which is I lay out this really nice P6 schedule. It's awesome. It goes across the entire project lifecycle. And P6 schedules are great. They're amazingly beneficial tools until the project starts, and then they become useless, right? Because if they were an effective tool, we wouldn't have 80% of our projects going more than 20% over schedule. And they're not an effective tool because they, with the waterfall planning approach, you don't have the ability to accept and absorb as much change. It's a rigid schedule. It is not agile by definition. So you cannot react to and absorb change as easily. And so when something gets off on the schedule, that has a whole bunch of ramifications down the line, and a bunch of stuff gets messed up, right? And it doesn't allow us to keep people fully productive and absorb those issues, those things that we can't, those unknown unknowns that pop up on projects. You cannot be as agile and flexible when you have a really rigid waterfall planning approach. So how does the AWP process help that? Well, it gets rid of that really strict, scheduling approach and moves to a sequencing approach. And it's a sequencing, but it's important to keep in mind what's a little bit different about AWP applied to construction as opposed to pure agile or Scrum methodology that you find in software development, for example, is that in construction, you really have to combine more of these high-level milestones with the low-level agile sequencing. So typically what we recommend to clients is that they do up to their level 3 from a scheduling perspective, right? Or they do level 1, level 2 kind of milestone planning, and then they move into a sequencing process where now I want to sequence my CWPs and my IWPs, and then even my tasks down below that are managed using task management within the tool, as opposed to trying to do everything as rigid activities inside of a very fixed and rigid schedule. So moving from scheduling to sequencing, and then combining this idea of, yes, I need some high-level milestones because there are these macro constraints like large crane rentals or other things that, long lead items, these things that are these macro constraints that I have to keep in mind, right? I can't just, wake up on Friday and say, okay, well, on Monday, I want to have this, massive crane here. I need to think about those things ahead of time. But by combining those high-level milestones with low-level agile sequencing, you get a real benefit in the process. And then lastly is the constraint management. By having a actual disciplined and tool-driven approach to constraint management, you can become very predictable in your execution because it enforces a process of uncovering all those unknowns ahead of time. It makes you find all those things and answer all those questions before you go to execute that work. And if you can't find all those things and answer all those questions, then you hold on to that package and you release a different one where you have answered all the questions and found all the information. So by having a constraint management process, it enables predictability because it prevents you from releasing work to execute that hasn't been fully thought through, planned, and prepared. So that leads to incredible predictability gains down the line. So how does O3 do this? Oh, well, it does this through the 4D path of construction planning and tracking process. It does this through CWP and IWP sequencing and releasing process, and it does this through constraint management built into the tool. So O3 is very powerful for you to be able to sequence the release of these CWPs, sequence the release of the IWPs, adjust and move things around as necessary to deal with the issues that arise in the field, and the disciplined constraint management functionality to allow you to have a proactive process of identifying those issues and answering those questions and getting them ready for release so that you can have predictable execution in the field. So what are the benefits of predictability? Why do I care? Well, one is schedule assurance, right? If I'm an owner and if I've communicated to the market that this product is going to be online by a certain date, and then hitting those dates is really important. You know, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to execute according to our plan. And if you don't have predictable execution, it's very hard to stay on your schedule or your plan. So predictability is critical for maintaining that schedule. Predictability also leads to this improved productivity, right? As things are predictably executed, you spend fewer of your cycles dealing with running around and scrambling and trying to figure things out. Instead, I'm in a very predictable execution process that allows me to be productive and allows me to be safe. And then core to this is that you get believable data. When you're using AWP and a tool like O3 that automates and documents that process and enforces and facilitates that process, you now have the ability to believe the data that is being presented to you. One of the things we hear all the time on projects that aren't using AWP or O3 is, yeah, we've got all these dashboards and all this data, but I don't believe any of it. I don't believe any of this information. Garbage in, garbage out. Well, by moving to a predictable, disciplined process with a tool that allows you to capture all that information and present it easily in a consumable way, it makes that very believable. So now you can use that as a tool for better decision making. And then the third major bucket of benefits that we discussed is measurability. So what's the challenge today on measurability? Well, when you look at, we mentioned earlier, this project snowflake concept. If you take two project managers and you try and compare their projects, they will immediately start to describe how it's apples and oranges, and you cannot compare those two things together because the projects are different, the scopes are different, the locations are different, the contracting strategy is different, the whatever's different. There's a million reasons why you cannot compare those. And all these project specifics make that a real challenge. Well, and that leads to us not doing real cross-project comparison. We really don't do a good job of that in this industry. And then the other challenge that we see is that a lot of our performance measurements, the measurables that we have today, relate to performance against the estimate, against the plan. The challenge with that is when you fail, is that because you had poor execution or a bad estimate or both, right? It's very hard when you're measuring just against those estimates to know exactly where you went wrong, whether that's a problem with baking in unrealistic expectations into the estimate in order to get the project approved, or really a poor performance in the actual execution. So that's challenges that we see today. When you bring in the AWP process, there's significant benefits to the measurability. One example of that is the concept of done, right? The way we track earned value by quantities today is very bad for our industry. It incents the wrong behavior. It incents contractors to hang a bunch of show pipe and skip the little things and be forced to come back and clean that up and do extra work later. right? Because you're getting paid just on pure quantities. You're not getting paid to get something actually done. Well, our clients, many of them have moved to doing earned value by package closeout, so done. It's not until that IWP is signed off by the owner that then the contractor gets paid for that. So the earned value is not just about how many feet of pipe have I put up. That piece of pipe doesn't count until everything's done and signed off, so that you are incented as the contractor to go in and actually get it done, not to skip the little stuff and punt that to some punch list that then the last 20% of the project takes forever because you're death by 1,000 paper cuts of all the little things that you've skipped. The other thing that's important is that measurability. When we think about measuring projects, the estimate versus actual challenge is a real challenge. It's hard to know, am I doing a good job on this project, or am I doing poorly because the estimate was a problem? But what O3 allows you to do, and the AWP process allows you to do, is to measure the planning process health. Look at the actual health of that process. Is the planning process itself a healthy process? And so you get away from this debate about the estimates and all that, and whether or not the benefits were baked in and all those things. And instead, you can measure things outside of just the outcomes. You can measure the process and the health of the process itself, which is a leading indicator as opposed to a lagging indicator like outcomes. And then lastly, cross-project comparison. By abstracting away from those project specifics, by looking and measuring the health of the planning process itself, I can compare against projects. And I don't care if the projects themselves are apples and oranges, it doesn't matter, because on each project, you're still gonna have a planning and execution process, and I can measure the health of that planning and execution process on each project and compare those and eliminate some of those excuses that project management teams will have as to why the projects can't be compared on an outcome basis. So what does O3 do to assist with this process? Well, it's AWP-based metrics. So obviously we've got lots of project controls components inside the tool, and a lot of those kind of standard measurements that you want to get productivity factor and those types of things, you can pull directly out of the solution. In addition to those project management metrics or project controls metrics, we also have the AWP-based metrics or measurables. And the actual measurement of that planning process and the health and adoption of the AWP process rather than just pure outcomes. So we provide the outcome-based measurements and the things that you're used to seeing, but by also adding the planning process measurement. So are your IWPs being, are they being created early enough? Do you have sufficient constraint management? Are they being released constraint-free to the field? Right? All these things, by looking at that process and the health of that process and whether or not it's being done early enough and thorough enough, that information then is a leading indicator which will help you to understand whether or not you're going to have good outcomes on that project. And then by having a repeatable process like we talked about, you can iteratively improve from package to package. So it's easier to get better and smarter when you've got a consistent process and a consistent tool that surfaces up that information on how you're doing from a process perspective. And so what are the values of that? Well, obviously there's an increase in productivity that comes from the ability to measure and improve. But the most important thing is the ability to drive improvement and course correct by identifying where you have challenges, by measuring the actual process itself, by measuring all the different planners, by measuring the different disciplines. You can understand where you have a healthy planning process, which is your greatest indicator for successful outcomes, a leading indicator of successful outcomes. It doesn't guarantee it, but it's the greatest known indicator of successful outcomes. Leading indicator of successful outcomes is good planning, and you can measure and identify where you have planning issues and then course correct and improve those planning processes to lead to better outcomes. And then by having a more believable and a more accurate representation of where the project is from a progress perspective, by looking at things like IWP closeout as opposed to traditional measures like just earned value quantities, you get better information, a better understanding of the true health and outcomes of the project, and you can make more informed and faster data-driven decisions when you're looking at that information. You often do not know that a project is completely off the rails from a quantities installation S-curve until it's too late to do anything. But you can very early on identify and recognize a challenge with the health of the IWP process and you can, as a leading indicator, and you can step in and make decisions and improve that process and correct that before it becomes too late and you can no longer adjust. So some of the key takeaways of the things that we learned today, first off is that AWP is a project execution methodology. It is not a construction execution methodology. It goes across the entire project life cycle, and it is a disciplined approach to planning. So planning and execution that allows you to have the more productive and safer work through that disciplined approach to planning. When we think about the value that or benefit that AWP brings and that O3 brings, we have to think about it in terms of the repeatability. So the ability to make projects consistent and repeatable so that we can have iterative improvement, as well as our planning process being repeatable within a project so that we can have iterative improvement from package to package in addition to project. Having predictability, so moving away from the traditional ways of measuring the project progress and moving to a very consistent and predictable view of execution leads to improvements in our productivity. It leads to improvements in schedule assurance. It allows us to extrapolate out into the future with confidence, which today is very difficult to do on projects. And measurability. So by abstracting away from the project specifics like the scope and the contracting strategy and the tech stack and all these things that are different from project to project and focusing on the planning process, health and adoption itself, you can compare across projects in a way that we haven't been able to do prior to the AWP and O3. It allows you to do meaningful cross-project comparison, which is unique and very valuable. And then the other piece is a better, more accurate measurement of the actual status of the project by moving away from traditional quantities, S-curve, and looking at instead the closeout and the actual AWP process and an IWP closeout as opposed to just pure quantities gives you a much more accurate view of the status of the project. And all of these things, the AWP process of project execution and the repeatability, predictability, and measurability that brings ultimately lead to an increase in productivity and an increase in safety. Because if you're able to have a repeatable, predictable, measurable process, it is a more productive process and it is a safer process. Work that is well thought out with all the questions answered, all the unknowns uncovered, all the issues addressed prior to it being released to the field is work that will be executed more efficiently in the field and will have fewer safety issues because you don't have people running around trying to make last-minute scrambles and find things that lead to inefficiency and safety issues. Excellent. Well, that is all that I had for today. Tori, I'd like to turn it over to you and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Josh. That was a great presentation. So we've got a few questions here. I'll start with the first one. What is the greatest benefit to implementing AWP, and how does O3 help with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, the greatest benefit to implementing AWP is bringing structure to the chaos, right? So projects go sideways when things get out of control and you're no longer able to kind of wrap your mind around the components. What AWP does is it gives you a way to break the project down into smaller bite-sized chunks that then I can wrap my mind around and I can manage those and manage them all the way through to completion. So the real benefit that results from that is the better predictability, the better repeatability, the better measurability, the increase in productivity, and the increase in safety. So which one of those is the greatest one? I think you have to say safety because obviously, protecting people is more important than money. But speaking more generically about the greatest benefit to implementing AWP, it's really just a better understanding of how your project how your project will be executed and how the status of that execution. AWP just gives you a view there that you don't get from other solutions or other approaches.
Okay, great. Well, here's another one. Have you actually seen 25% increases in productivity on projects, or is this a myth?
Yeah, another good question. So yeah, I talked about this a little bit. CII leadership, we're going back and forth about, hey, should we just drop this number altogether? Is this misleading? And the reality is we are seeing this on more mature projects. It is sometimes difficult to measure unless you're doing pure time on tools measurements. That doesn't necessarily equate exactly to productivity, but you assume it does. So it's a good kind of triangulation around that number. So as I mentioned, our best large study showed 18% across tens of thousands of, possibly hundreds of thousands of observations across 30 or so projects. So that's the best, really well documented. But we believe we've seen 25% increase in other projects that are more mature. Very rare do you see that kind of productivity gain on someone who's new to the process or technology.
All right, let's knock out one more question. How is O3 any different than any other software products that purport to provide the same AWP benefit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the way that I would answer that is that O3 is the only solution that exists that is a true AWP solution across the entire project lifecycle. There are a number of work-phase planning tools, some of which that were made, 20 years ago that are, they're being kind of shut down now. So there's kind of a first wave of older technologies on the work-phase planning side. But the reality is O3 is the first solution to be a true project lifecycle wide AWP solution. So from the very early front end planning all the way through startup and commissioning with functionality to support every step of that process. And then the other kind of key component there that's different is that unlike the typical models that most companies have of a seat model, O3 specifically does an unlimited users model. And the reason why we do that is because it's a collaboration. For AWP to be done correctly, you need to have collaboration. It needs to be across all the project stakeholders, not just one organization. So it's the contractor, the owner, everybody's got to be in there collaborating together. And O3 is the first and only AWP tool to really solve that problem, to be a true collaboration tool across thousands of users on a project. And that started with our constraint management functionality, which is the market leading solution around constraint management, but it's expanded to all tasks within the project. So it can be RFIs, it can be approvals, it can be constraints, it could be delays, it could be risks. Any of the actions or tasks or decisions or things that need to be done on the project across all those stakeholders can then be managed in that collaboration environment so that you have visibility across everyone. And by bringing everyone into the tool and having the tool go across the entire life cycle, it allows you to maximize the benefits. You can get value from AWP with just one person in just construction, right? That's better than nothing, having one work phase planner there, right? But if you expand that and you cover more disciplines, that's more value. If you expand that and it's more life cycle, that's more value. If you expand that and you've got more users across all the contractors, the owner and everyone, that's more value. So O3 is the first and only solution. It's why we're the market leading solution for allowing that AWP to be executed across all project stakeholders across the entire project life cycle, so you can maximize the value of AWP to your project.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think that's going to do it for all the questions we have time for. But I would like to invite everybody to learn more by visiting our website at www.o3.solutions. And if you have continued questions about what we presented today, you can always email us at info@o3.solutions. And on our website, you'll find tons of resources where you can continue learning more about AWP. We've got an AWP toolkit that you can use, and we've got an ROI calculator and a health assessment to help you begin a successful journey in implementing AWP on any kind of project. So please reach out to us if you have any feedback or questions, and stay tuned for next month's webinar. And thank you again to Josh for presenting and to all of your attendance and helpful questions.
Thank you.